Hello, my name is Dr. Aaron, and today in this tutorial we're going to talk a little bit about how to carve wax teeth. So this video is going to be all about the maxillary central incisor. So as you can see over here, I have a wax block on which I've already marked out all the sides and the length of the crown and of the root. So that's 10 millimeters for the crown, 13 for the root, and we have our various sides. So we have our lingual, and opposite to that we have the labial, and opposite to that on 90 degrees we have the distal, and opposite the distal we have the mesial. Okay, so before we begin I want to show you something. So this is an Licron carver, which is what we basically use to carve teeth, and this carver is an API carver. So as you can see, the head over here, the blade over here, and this blade is below the long axis of the instrument, as opposed to a cheap Licron carver which you can also buy from the market. As you can see, the blade is much smaller and the bulk of the handle of the instrument is more, and the blade is very thin, and also the bevel of the cutting edge isn't smooth, so you can see all these serrations over here, which basically means that your carve isn't going to be as good as it could be. And this is again another quality of a cheap Licron carver which tries to imitate an API one. So don't get fooled by people trying to sell you these, because all these do is provide a good margin to the shopkeeper and nothing else. Now if we could try to zoom in here. Okay, anyway, so move those out of the way. Now, kids often ask me, how can you do a tooth or a crown in a few minutes? And I tell them that the secret is in a cutter. So as you can see, there's a very well used cutter. So of course I have experience, but if you just recommend you buy a new cutter and make sure that it's clean. Don't have it as dirty as this, because if you cut yourself you might get septic. So let's zoom in a little bit here just to make sure that you are able to see what I'm doing much more clearly. So as you can see, we will be beginning from either the lingual or the labial side. So the labial side for this, and we have the mesial side and the distal side. So now, as we know, the mesial side corresponds to the part of the tooth towards the midline, and here we go, removing the wax from the mesial side, and as you can see, we've created a sort of a taper with a very sharp angle over here. Now the distal angle isn't as sharp on either side, so we will round that off, and as you can see, we've made a notch over here to round off that angle. Everybody will not be happy with this, but the thing is, you can always work until you're able to achieve a proper contour. Of course, ideally I would have liked to look at a Wheeler's diagram while doing this, but for the scope of the video, I think the technique is more important than the shape that I bring out, and I would recommend that you look at the Wheeler's diagram while you carve. So anyway, as you can see, we have the labial and the lingual aspects almost done, with the distal curved over here. Now this is the important part. This is the occlusal aspect of the tooth, and as we know, towards the lingual it should taper. So now we look at the lingual side, which is over here, and we want to taper our occlusal aspect. So what do? We go straight down the center and we mark a line that tells us how much of the tooth is to be conserved, and 1 or 0.5 millimeters below that line we just start creating this sort of taper, and as you can see, we are able to taper the tooth very nicely. Okay, alright, now we go towards the buccal side, and our aim is to understand where the crest of contour lies. So every tooth is divided into thirds. So you have your incisal third, which would be somewhere around there, then you have your middle third, which would end there, and then you have the cervical third, which would end all the way at the cervix of the tooth, or the neck of the tooth, or the cervical line of the tooth. And now what we will do, as we know, on the buccal side, in the buccal outline, the crest of contour, which is the highest point of any curvature for the maxillary central incisor, lies at the junction of the middle and the cervical third. So that would be somewhere around here. So we give that a little notch just so we know where that is, and we cut above that notch to create a buccal or a facial slope of the tooth, which should come out something like that. And then we tuck in the cervix a little bit. Of course, we need to bring out a cervical bulge, and that's that. And now we need to create the cingulum. Now for the cingulum, you need to remember is that there's a lingual lobe of an interior tooth, and the cingulum itself is the bulkiest cingulum of any tooth in the mouth on this particular central incisor. So what that basically means is that the demarcations of the cingulum are very, very prominent and very sharp, although of course maxillary canines have a greater labiolingual dimension, but the maxillary central incisor cingulum appears to be much more bulky when compared in ratio to the crown of the tooth. So we're going to reduce the wax from there a little bit more. As you can see, we've achieved that effect. We're going to want to smoothen out the labial a little bit more because I think the bulk was a bit too much over there. And there we go. Now the cingulum, of course, is the lingual lobe of an interior tooth, and it slopes downward a little bit. Sorry for going off camera so often. I can't see very clearly, and I would sometimes want to go off camera to be able to work better. Now, as you can see, we've carved out the basic shape of the tooth all in under 4 minutes. Now we close our cutter, put it to the side, and we get our carver. So the carver is basically just used to round off everything, okay? So we begin by rounding off the labial side. Like so. Alright, then you can just round that off nicely. Notice how my hand just keeps on carving in one plane, with my right hand, and my left hand keeps on turning the wax block, so that prevents me from trying to make all these nasty angles. And yep, okay, now we smoothen out a mesial outline over here, as you can see. Okay, sharpen up that point angle a little bit. That's the mesio-incisal point angle, and round off the distal angle a little bit. There you go. Then you carve off on the buccal side again. Now you try to adapt that shape over there so as to make the cingulum look nice and prominent. You see that there. Nice. Now the distal side as well. But before we do that, we need to make sure that our lingual receives the carving treatment as well, because it's imperative to round the tooth off. So if you want to make sure that it's looking good, you look at it occlusally, and as you can see, we've managed to round off most of the tooth structure over there. Okay, now the distal aspect, tuck that in a little bit, let it flare out a little occlusally, and I guess we're more or less done when it comes to course shape of the tooth. And now it's time for characterizations. So now the maxillary central incisor is characterized specifically by three major things. The first, on the mesial side, the cervical line has the highest crest of contour of any tooth and of any aspect of any tooth in the whole mouth. So which means that the cervical line on the mesial aspect, which is over here, should be highest up to over here around 3.5 millimeters. The second thing is that the cingulum and the fossa that lies below the cingulum is in an M or a W shape. So which is why the cingulum appears even more prominent. So here we're going to try and recreate that fossa. So now, as we all know, that the fossa is bounded on different sides by different structures. So you have something known as the marginal ridges. So you have the mesial marginal ridge, which is the boundary of the fossa mesially. Then you have the distal marginal ridge, which is the boundary of the fossa distally, and then you have the incisal ridge, which is not to be confused with the incisal edge, which is that sharp tip over there, and the incisal ridge is this whole bulk over here. So you have the incisal ridge, which is the boundary incisally. Now that you have that marked out, you could go ahead and just finish it off a little bit. Use the back of your carver to try and create a better looking groove. Now, of course, it's not going to come out perfect for you at the first go, but I assure you, if you keep trying and you use this technique and you use this witchcraft and wizardry of the carver and the cutter together, you are going to be able to make fantastic teeth in no time. Alright, so I am quite okay with how this looks now, and I think before adding more characterizations, I would like to finish off the root. So now this tooth has a more or less conical root. So to create the root, now here's the tricky part. Be careful not to cut your thumb and your fingers. You only get 2 pairs in your whole life that are yours. You can of course cut other people's off and have them attached, but they don't work so well, do they? Anyway, so moving on, once you've cut away all that wax that you just do not need in your life, once you've cut away all that wax, once you've cut away all that wax, you should be left with this pillar-like structure, but because you carved the lingual so well, it shouldn't be so difficult to shape. So the trick here is to begin cervically, to shape it cervically first, like so, and so, and so. And then proceed to carve it off apically. Now, of course, this being a wax block, and we are trying to recreate the look of a tooth emerging from the wax block, so I would expect at least a couple of millimeters of the root, or the root tip, in fact to be embedded in the wax, because if I do carve the root tip, the tooth will come out of the wax block. So I guess what's more important here is to carve the basic shape of the root and to ensure at all times that you are focused on creating a smooth and natural contour on all the surfaces of the tooth, because if your contour looks good, then so will your tooth. Now here's the chance for you to make sure that your cingulum looks pronounced. So what I do is I tuck in the wax over there and then flip the tooth around and then give that wax a little tuck in too. So that helps my cingulum to protrude a little bit, and then I use this carver to just smoothen it out so that it looks natural and doesn't look too bulky, and at the same time I'm able to achieve an effect that shows this quite bulk to the cingulum itself. Now I think for my case over here, our cingulum did get a bit too bulky, so I think I reduced that a little bit, maybe a little bit more. So it's all about your eye basically. Now here's the important bit you really need to read. Now if I would ask you to define a marginal ridge, it would be difficult for most dental students to define what a marginal ridge is, when in fact the definition only runs into a few words. It's a rounded border of enamel. So there's 4 words to that definition. You can find that in your Nelson and Ash, in the first few pages, where they introduce the various parts of the tooth and the various structures of the tooth. Now we talked about 2 features of the central incisor to distinguish it as a central incisor, and one of them was of course the cervical line, which I'm yet to make, and the second was this fossa. The third feature is that the tip of the crown for this tooth and the tip of the root for this tooth lie on the long axis and in one straight line. So that's very important. As you can see, we have a bit of a curvature over here, which we don't want because the crest then lies over there, but then I want the crest to be shifted down a little bit over there. So what we're gonna do over here is just remove some wax to give it an appearance. The crest of contour is actually down there, as you can see. And it also gives you the flat and broad classic central incisor look on the labial side. Now we can carve our cervical line higher on the mesial, rounded around the border of the tooth, not so high on the distal, and rounded again below the bulk of the enamel, and then merging it on the other side. So as you can see, our carving here is more or less complete. So let's polish this tooth off a little bit and then look at it again. So for polishing you would want to use a soft cloth, and here we are back again with our sample, which is nicely polished now. Let's try and see if we can brighten this up a little bit. Yeah, can see, maybe if I don't know. Okay, so as you can see, all the features of the tooth are there. Okay, so thank you for all your support, and sorry for such a long video, and next time we'll try to keep it short. If I wouldn't have to explain this, I could probably do this in 10 minutes, and I hope so that you can too. I wish you all the success in your dental careers. Best of luck, and goodbye.